The scent of roses still clung to Lena's skin, a delicate reminder of the vows she had spoken just hours ago. She had been a bride, radiant, trembling, filled with love. The warmth of her husband's hand in hers, the way he had looked at her beneath the glow of candlelight, it had felt like a promise of forever. But forever had lasted less than a night. Now, standing alone in the grand bedroom of her new home, Lena felt a chill creep into her bones. The silky white sheets were untouched on one side of the bed. A single pillow lay undisturbed. Her husband was gone. Panic tightened her chest as she stepped out into the dimly lit hallway, her bare feet silent against the marble floor. The mansion was eerily still, the grand chandeliers casting long shadows. Where had he gone? A sudden emergency? A mistake? A cruel joke? She searched every room. The parlor, the study, even the gardens, nothing. Her pulse pounded in her ears, drowning out rational thought. This wasn't right. A groom did not simply disappear on his wedding night. Desperate, she found herself in front of the one door she had hoped never to knock on. Gabriel's door. Her husband's older brother was a man of sharp edges, carved from ice and steel. Where Michael had been warm, Gabriel was cold. Where Michael had smiled, Gabriel had scowled. He had been against this marriage from the start. She had seen it in his dark, piercing eyes, in the tension that laced his every word. And yet, she had no one else to turn to. Taking a shaky breath, she raised her hand and knocked. Silence. Then the sound of movement. The door swung open, revealing Gabriel in nothing but dark slacks, his bare chest catching the dim light. His muscles were tense, his expression unreadable. He took one look at her, her disheveled hair, the worry in her eyes, and frowned. "What are you doing here?" His voice was rough, laced with irritation. Lena swallowed, her fingers twisting in the fabric of her nightgown. "Michael, he's gone." Gabriel's jaw tightened. For a moment, he said nothing, merely watching her with that unnerving intensity of his. Then, finally, he stepped back, allowing her inside. The room was different from Michael's. Darker, colder. A place of discipline rather than comfort. A whiskey glass sat untouched on the desk, papers scattered around it. "Tell me everything," Gabriel said, crossing his arms over his chest. Lena's voice wavered as she spoke. "I woke up and he wasn't there. I've searched everywhere. I don't understand. Why would he leave?" Gabriel exhaled slowly, his gaze unreadable. "You should go back to bed." She gaped at him. "What?" "You're panicking over nothing," he said, but there was something off in his tone, something guarded. Michael always had a reckless streak. Maybe he went for a drive. Maybe he needed space. Lena shook her head. "He wouldn't just leave me." Something flickered in Gabriel's expression. "Wouldn't he?" His words cut through her like a blade. She wanted to deny it, to insist that Michael had been different. But doubt coiled around her heart. Gabriel turned away, running a hand through his dark hair. "If he doesn't return by morning, I'll look into it." It wasn't enough. "Please," she whispered. "Help me find him." Gabriel sighed, his jaw tightening. For a long moment, he simply looked at her. Then, with a nod, he murmured, "Get dressed. We leave at dawn." And just like that, Lena found herself in an uneasy alliance with the one man she had never wanted to trust. But as they searched for her missing husband, she would come to realize a terrible truth, one that would shake her to the core. Michael's disappearance was no accident, and the man she had sworn to hate might be the only one who could save her. Lena barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Michael's face, his teasing smile, the way he had whispered against her lips, "Forever, Lena." But forever had lasted only a few hours. She lay awake, listening to the sounds of the mansion, the occasional creak of old wood, the wind rattling against the glass windows, the distant echo of footsteps, Gabriel's perhaps. He had said they would leave at dawn, but she could already feel the weight of time pressing down on her chest. Something was wrong. She felt it deep in her bones. By the time the first slivers of sunlight broke through the curtains, she was already dressed. She chose a simple outfit, dark jeans, a fitted coat, and ankle boots. Practical. No longer a bride, but a woman searching for answers. A sharp knock at her door made her jump. Gabriel stood there, fully dressed in a black button-down and a long coat, his expression unreadable. If he was surprised that she was already ready, he didn't show it. "Let's go." No wasted words. No reassurances. Just movement. As they descended the grand staircase, the staff turned to watch them, murmuring among themselves. She caught the worried glances of the housekeeper, the way the butler stiffened as Gabriel walked past. They knew something. But Gabriel gave them no time to speak. Within minutes, they were in his sleek black car, rolling through the iron gates of the estate. The world outside was waking up, street vendors opening their stalls, businessmen hailing taxis, lovers walking hand in hand. It all felt so painfully normal. But Lena's world had already changed. She gripped her hands together, forcing herself to keep her voice steady. "Where are we going first?" Gabriel's fingers tightened around the steering wheel. "His office. If Michael had business there before he disappeared, someone will know." Lena studied him. His jaw was set, his dark eyes fixed on the road ahead. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look worried. He looked like a man who already had suspicions. "You don't think this was an accident, do you?" she asked quietly. Gabriel didn't answer right away. Instead, he exhaled, rolling his shoulders as if preparing for battle. Michael wasn't the kind of man to walk away from something without reason. Lena's heart twisted. "Then why did he walk away from me?" Gabriel glanced at her, something flickering in his gaze before he looked away. "That's what we're going to find out." The tension in the car was suffocating, thick with unspoken words. Lena didn't trust Gabriel. She never had. But right now, he was her only lifeline. When they finally arrived at Michael's office building, a sleek, modern tower of glass, Lena forced herself to stand tall. This place had been a second home to her husband. Surely, someone here knew where he had gone. But as they stepped inside, she immediately noticed the shift in atmosphere. The receptionist looked startled to see them, her fingers trembling slightly as she tucked a strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Mrs. Calloway," she said, forcing a smile. I wasn't expecting you." Lena hesitated. "I need to see Michael's assistant."
"Now."
The receptionist faltered. Gabriel stepped forward, his presence commanding. "We're not asking." His voice was low, smooth, but there was an edge to it that made the woman swallow nervously. "Yes, of course," she stammered, picking up the phone. "I'll let him know right away." A few minutes later, a middle-aged man with graying hair and round glasses stepped out of the hallway. Michael's assistant, Harold. The moment he saw them, his expression darkened. "Mr. Calloway," Harold said, nodding toward Gabriel, then turning to Lena. "Mrs. Calloway. I didn't expect to see you here." Lena's heart pounded. "Michael is missing." Harold's throat bobbed. Where was he last seen?" Gabriel cut in, his tone sharp. Harold's fingers twitched at his sides. I don't know." Lena narrowed her eyes. "You're lying." The assistant flinched. He tried to step back, but Gabriel was faster, grabbing his wrist in a firm grip. It wasn't violent, but it was enough to make Harold freeze. "You've worked for my brother for a long time," Gabriel said, his voice low and dangerous. "You know something. And if you don't tell us, I'll make sure you regret it." Lena shivered. Harold swallowed hard. His eyes darted around, as if checking for eavesdroppers, before he finally whispered, "Michael, he said he was meeting someone last night. A private meeting. He didn't say where. But he seemed tense." Lena's breath caught. Gabriel released Harold and stepped back, his gaze cold. "Who was he meeting?" Harold hesitated, then shook his head. I don't know." Lena clenched her fists.
"Please.
"If you know something, tell us." Harold looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. Something softened in his expression. "I don't know who he was meeting," he said quietly, "but I know one thing." Lena held her breath. Harold's voice was barely a whisper. Michael was afraid. Lena's stomach twisted. Michael had been afraid. The words lingered in the air, heavy and suffocating. Her husband, The man who had always carried himself with confidence, who had whispered promises of forever, had been scared. And she had never noticed. Gabriel stood unnervingly still, his dark eyes locked onto Harold like a predator, sizing up prey. The older man shifted under the weight of his gaze, beads of sweat forming on his temple. "What kind of fear?" Gabriel asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Harold swallowed hard. "I don't know. But I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't himself." Lena's breath came shallow. "Did he say anything? Did he?" "I've told you all I know." Harold's voice wavered. "Please don't ask me more." Gabriel's jaw ticked, but after a tense pause, he nodded. "Fine." Lena wasn't satisfied. "If you remember anything, I'll let you know," Harold interrupted, then turned on his heel and hurried away, his shoulders tense with unease. Lena exhaled, rubbing her temples. "What now?" Gabriel's hand landed on the small of her back, guiding her toward the elevator. The touch was brief, impersonal, but it sent a shiver through her anyway. "We dig deeper," he murmured. Once they were outside, Gabriel opened the passenger door of his car for her. She hesitated before getting in, watching him carefully. There was something about him, something restrained, something knowing. He wasn't as surprised by all of this as he should have been. She waited until he slid into the driver's seat before asking, "You already have a theory, don't you?" Gabriel didn't start the engine. His fingers flexed against the steering wheel. "I have suspicions." Lena's stomach churned. "And you weren't going to share them with me?" He sighed, finally meeting her gaze. "You're not ready for the truth." Her fingers curled into fists. "Don't treat me like a child, Gabriel." Something flickered in his expression, annoyance, maybe. Or something deeper. Then, after a long silence, he spoke. "Michael wasn't just my brother, Lena. He was a risk-taker. A gambler. He got involved with dangerous people." Lena's heart pounded. "What kind of dangerous people?" Gabriel's lips pressed into a thin line. "The kind that don't let you just walk away." The car felt too small, the air too thick.
No.
No, this wasn't possible. Michael wasn't reckless. He wasn't like that. Was he? She shook her head. If he was in trouble, why wouldn't he tell me? Gabriel's jaw tightened. Maybe he was trying to protect you. Lena turned away, staring out of the window. The city blurred past, neon lights flashing, the world moving on as if her life hadn't just unraveled. Michael had been keeping secrets from her. And Gabriel, he knew more than he was saying. They drove in silence until Gabriel pulled into an underground parking garage beneath a high-end club. Lena frowned, glancing at the sleek, blacked-out cars parked in the VIP section. "Why are we here?" she asked. Gabriel unbuckled his seatbelt. "Because Michael's last meeting wasn't in his office." Lena's pulse spiked. "You knew." "I had a hunch." He turned to her, his gaze dark and unreadable. "And I need you to follow my lead." She clenched her jaw. She didn't trust Gabriel. Not entirely, but right now, he was the only one who seemed to be leading her toward answers. She nodded. The club was bathed in dim red lighting, the scent of expensive whiskey and cigars thick in the air. Wealth dripped from every corner. Diamond-studded cuffs, designer dresses, the scent of power and corruption. Gabriel moved through it effortlessly, drawing glances from men and women alike. Lena stayed close, feeling every gaze that swept over her, measuring, assessing. They stopped at a private booth in the back, where a man sat with two women draped over him. He was older, mid-40s maybe, with slicked-back hair and a cruel smirk. The moment he saw Gabriel, the smirk widened. Well, the man drawled. "Didn't expect to see you here." Gabriel slid into the seat across from him. "I need information." The man chuckled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "It always comes at a price." Gabriel's expression didn't change. "I'm willing to pay." Lena's heart hammered as the man turned his gaze on her, raking over her with slow amusement. "And who's this?" Gabriel's jaw ticked. "None of your business." The man laughed. "Touchy." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You're looking for your brother, aren't you?" Lena stiffened. Gabriel didn't react, but his grip on the table tightened. "Where is he?" The man exhaled, shaking his head. Should have left town when he had the chance. Lena's blood ran cold. What do you mean? The man's eyes gleamed with something dark. Your husband made a deal he couldn't keep. And now? He leaned back with a satisfied smirk. Now he belongs to them. Lena walked down the hallway of the grand estate, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and conflicting emotions. She had always prided herself on being able to control her feelings, but now, with the weight of a past love triangle resurfacing, she found herself at a loss. It had all started years ago when she had fallen for Ethan, Mark's younger brother. Ethan had always been the charming, easygoing one, with a smile that could melt anyone's heart. He was the kind of man who effortlessly made people feel special, and to Lena that was exactly what she needed at the time. But things had never been simple between them. At the same time, Mark had been the more serious one, the one who always seemed to be one step ahead of everyone. As a high-ranking officer, his life was full of expectations and duty, but his calm demeanor and strength had attracted Lena in a different way. They had shared quiet moments of understanding, but those moments were always overshadowed by the tension between him and his brother. And then, out of nowhere, it seemed like Ethan's feelings for Lena had grown, pulling her into a web of confusion. The three of them had danced around each other in a delicate balance of love, loyalty, and guilt. Lena had never wanted to hurt either of them, but her feelings for both men had only grown stronger, each in different ways. But in the end, it was Ethan who had confessed his feelings first. They had shared a passionate, secret romance for months, keeping their love hidden from the prying eyes of their families. But nothing could stay hidden forever. One night, when Mark had inadvertently walked in on them, the truth had come crashing down. Mark's expression had been unreadable, and Ethan had been torn between guilt and defiance. Lena had tried to explain, but the damage was done. The betrayal had shattered the fragile bonds between them. Now, years later, the past was resurfacing, and Lena could feel the same tension building again. Mark was in town for a work assignment, and the moment their paths had crossed, everything had come flooding back. Ethan, too, had appeared unexpectedly, as though fate was playing its hand once again. She had avoided them both as best as she could, but now she found herself standing at the door to the family gathering. She could hear voices from within, and she hesitated, knowing that what awaited her would only make things harder. Lena, a voice called, and she froze. It was Ethan, his voice laced with an emotion she couldn't quite place. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze. "You're avoiding me again," he said softly, his eyes searching hers for something, anything that would give him a glimpse of the woman he once knew. "I'm not avoiding you," Lena replied, but even she could hear the lie in her own voice. I don't know how to act around you anymore." Ethan stepped closer, his hand brushing against her arm. "You don't have to act.
Just be honest with me."
With both of us." Her breath hitched. She knew who he was talking about. Lena's heart thudded painfully in her chest. She could feel the familiar weight of the triangle pulling at her, testing her loyalty to both men. Would she continue to deny what had once been, or would she finally confront it all? Lena's heart raced as Ethan's words lingered in the air, hanging heavy between them. She glanced down at his hand, still resting lightly on her arm, a touch so familiar yet foreign now. It had been years since they had been this close, and the memories surged to the surface. Memories of stolen moments, quiet conversations, and that forbidden love they had shared.
But all of that was in the past.
She stepped back, gently pulling her arm away, her gaze now firmly meeting his. "Ethan," she began, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I made a choice. I chose Mark. I chose to be loyal to him. I can't go back on that." Ethan's face tightened, his brows furrowing as if the words had struck him harder than he expected. For a moment, the warm, easygoing facade he wore seemed to crack, revealing the raw vulnerability underneath. But it was only for a brief second. "I didn't come here to push you, Lena," he said, his voice softening. I need you to be sure. To be honest with yourself. You deserve happiness too. I just want you to know I'll never regret what we had." But if you've moved on, then I can't stay in this place anymore, in this limbo. Lena's throat tightened as she nodded. I've moved on, Ethan. You need to find your own peace too. Ethan exhaled sharply, and for a moment, it felt as if he was about to say something more. But instead, he gave her a small, sad smile. I guess we both have to let go. He turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the distance, leaving Lena standing there, her heart heavy with both sorrow and relief. As she stood by the door, contemplating everything that had just unfolded, she couldn't shake the feeling that the past had been a chapter she was now finally closing. But it wasn't easy. Love, no matter how complicated, left an indelible mark. Yet she had made her choice. She had promised herself that she would be loyal to Mark, and she had to honor that promise, no matter the cost. Meanwhile, Ethan didn't take long to find someone new. Lena had heard whispers about a woman named Clara, a colleague from his latest project, and within a few weeks, they were inseparable. Ethan seemed to have found in Clara something that filled the void Lena had once occupied. He was happy again, and though a part of Lena felt a pang of jealousy, she couldn't deny that it was a relief to see him moving forward. And yet, the moment she saw Mark again, saw the way his gaze lingered on her with that familiar warmth, his protective nature evident as ever, Lena knew she had made the right choice. Mark had been through so much, and despite the challenges, they had built a life together. She wouldn't abandon him now. She wasn't sure if her heart would ever stop aching from the unresolved feelings between her, Mark, and Ethan. But she could look at her husband now, and though things weren't perfect, she knew that her loyalty was what mattered most. It wasn't the easiest path, but it was hers to walk. Days passed after the conversation with Lena. Ethan did his best to keep his emotions in check, though it wasn't easy. The sadness of letting go of something that had once felt so right weighed heavily on him. But the decision had been made. Lena had moved on, and so would he. He threw himself into his work, keeping busy with his new assignments and focusing on the future. Yet, despite his best efforts, there was an emptiness inside him that he couldn't ignore. The space Lena had left in his life felt like an unfillable hole. That is, until he met Clara. It happened one evening when Ethan had to attend a conference about a new project he was involved in. Clara was one of the speakers, a sharp, intelligent woman with a brilliant mind. She was new to the company, but her presence immediately stood out among the crowd. Her speech was passionate, focused on innovation and progress, and her words resonated with Ethan on a level he hadn't expected. After the session, while mingling with the attendees, Ethan found himself gravitating toward her. She was surrounded by a small group of people, laughing and engaging in a lively conversation. But when their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. A spark. It wasn't immediate love, but there was an undeniable connection. Ethan, right? Clara asked, stepping forward with a warm, inviting smile. Yeah, he replied, feeling a little taken aback by her directness, though it was a welcome change. Clara, right? Your presentation was amazing. Thanks, she said with a hint of modesty, her eyes lighting up. I can tell you're not just saying that because it's polite. No, it really was impressive, he said with a smile. I could tell you're passionate about your work. I respect that. They spoke for a few more minutes, exchanging thoughts about the industry and their respective projects. There was something easy about the way they conversed, as if they had known each other longer than they actually had. Ethan found himself laughing more than he had in a while, the tension in his chest slowly easing as Clara's presence filled the space around him. Over the next few weeks, their paths continued to cross. Clara was the type of person who didn't shy away from initiating a conversation, and Ethan couldn't help but be drawn to her. She was confident, straightforward, and didn't put on a facade. She had an openness that made him feel comfortable, something he hadn't realized he'd been craving. One evening, after a particularly long day, Ethan found himself sitting at a bar when Clara walked in with a few colleagues. Her eyes scanned the room, and when she saw him, she smiled and waved him over. Mind if I join you? She asked as she approached, her tone light and friendly. Ethan gestured to the empty seat beside him. Of course. What are you drinking? A glass of wine will do. Thank you. Clara replied, sitting down with an ease that made Ethan feel like they had known each other far longer than just a few weeks. They chatted casually, talking about everything from work to their favorite movies. The conversation flowed naturally, and for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt like he could let his guard down. There were no heavy expectations, no past ghosts lingering in the background. It was just two people enjoying each other's company, and Ethan could feel the weight of his past starting to lift, little by little. As the night wore on, they walked out of the bar together, the cool evening air refreshing after the warmth of the room. "You know," Clara said, looking at him with a thoughtful expression, "I'm glad we met. It's not often that you meet someone you can just connect with. No games. No pretense." Ethan nodded, feeling the truth in her words. "Yeah, me too. I've been through a lot recently, and it's nice to just breathe, you know?" Clara smiled warmly, her gaze meeting his with understanding. "I get it. It's hard, sometimes, to find your footing again after everything." For a brief moment, they stood in silence, the streetlights casting a soft glow around them. Then, Clara took a step closer, her voice lowering slightly. "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He had felt the stirrings of something new between them for a while, but hearing her say it aloud made it real. He had already started to move on from the past, but this was different. It wasn't a rebound or a distraction. It was something more. "Thanks," he said quietly. "I think I might need that." In the days that followed, their relationship blossomed slowly but steadily. Clara had a way of making Ethan feel seen in ways he hadn't experienced before. They went on casual dates, spent time talking about their shared passions, and gradually, Ethan realized that he was falling for her. It wasn't the chaotic, all-consuming love he had once felt for Lena, but it was deep and genuine in its own right. Clara's presence brought him peace, and for the first time in a long while, he felt like he was finally moving forward. As their bond grew stronger, Ethan found himself thinking less about the past. Lena was no longer the center of his world, and though he still carried some remnants of that old love with him, he could see the potential of a new future with Clara. A future where he could finally heal, love again, and build something lasting. And for the first time in years, Ethan allowed himself to believe that happiness was possible again. Ethan sat in the cozy cafe, stirring his coffee absently, the warmth of the cup seeping into his cold hands. It had become a familiar routine for him and Clara, meet here after work, share a quiet moment, and talk about their days. The comfortable silence between them had become something he cherished, and yet, there was something lingering in the back of his mind that he knew he had to address. Clara was sitting across from him, her eyes focused on the book she was reading, but Ethan could tell her thoughts were somewhere else. She had always been perceptive, noticing things that most people wouldn't. "Ethan?" Clara's soft voice cut through the silence, drawing his attention. "You're awfully quiet today. Something on your mind?" He hesitated, then placed his cup down, meeting her gaze. "Yeah, there's something I need to tell you." Clara's brow furrowed slightly, sensing the gravity in his tone. She closed the book and leaned forward, her full attention on him. "You know you can tell me anything." Ethan took a deep breath, his thoughts turning inward. He hadn't planned to share this part of his past with Clara, not yet, but he knew it was time. She deserved the truth. She deserved to understand the weight he carried. "I've been through a lot in my life, Clara," he began, his voice steady, but tinged with the weight of the past. "There was someone I cared for deeply before we met." Clara nodded, her expression softening. "I figured as much. You're not exactly someone who wears their heart on their sleeve." Ethan chuckled lightly, but it quickly faded.
"Yeah,
"I guess I'm not. But it's different. This person, her name was Lena. We had something once, something real. But I messed up. I fell in love with her while she was married to my brother, Mark." Clara's eyes widened, her surprise evident. "Your brother?" Ethan nodded, his chest tightening. It was a complicated situation. Mark and Lena were already together, and I was caught in a whirlwind of emotions I didn't know how to handle. We got close. Very close. We even had an affair. I thought I loved her, but it wasn't just about love. It was about something deeper, something that was born from the chaos of that time. Clara listened in silence, her gaze never leaving him. Ethan continued, his voice growing more distant as he relived the pain of that betrayal. Eventually Mark found out. It tore our family apart. Lena chose him and I was left behind. I haven't seen her in years, but I still think about her sometimes. Not in the way I did before, but enough to make me feel like there's still unfinished business inside me. Clara didn't interrupt. She just let him speak, allowing him to unburden himself. Ethan could feel the weight of his confession, but at the same time, it was freeing. He hadn't realized how much he had kept bottled up inside until he said the words aloud. When he finished, he looked at Clara, her expression unreadable. The silence between them felt thick, as though the air itself was holding its breath. "I don't want to hide this from you," Ethan said quietly, his voice a mixture of regret and vulnerability. "I know this isn't easy to hear, but I thought you should know about the past I've been carrying. It's part of me, but it doesn't define who I am now. I've moved on. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I want to be honest with you." Clara sat back in her chair, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. Her gaze was steady, though her eyes held an unreadable depth. "You don't have to ask for forgiveness, Ethan," she said softly. "I'm not here to judge you for what happened. What matters to me is where you are now, and where we go from here." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "I'm here now, Clara. With you. And I don't want to repeat the mistakes I made in the past. I just need you to know that it's a part of me that I can't erase, but it doesn't mean I'm not fully committed to building something real with you." Clara's lips curved into a gentle smile, and her eyes softened. "I can't promise that I won't have moments where it feels overwhelming. I don't know all the details, but I trust you. I trust that you're not that person anymore. And I want to see where this goes, where we go. I'm not here to hold your past against you, Ethan. I'm here because I see who you are now." Ethan felt a wave of relief wash over him, the tightness in his chest loosening. For the first time in a long while, he realized that he had truly moved on from the past, not just in action but in spirit. Clara's understanding, her unwavering support, made him believe that he was finally on the right path. They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the confession dissipating in the calm between them. Ethan reached across the table, his hand resting gently over hers. Clara didn't pull away. Instead, she squeezed his hand, a silent promise that they would face whatever came next together. "I'm glad you told me," Clara said quietly, her eyes meeting his with warmth and understanding. "And I'm here, no matter what." Ethan felt a rush of emotion, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and hope for the future. It had taken a lot to get to this point, but as he looked at Clara, he knew that he had found something worth fighting for. After the conversation, Ethan and Clara lingered in the cafe for a while longer, their hands still intertwined. The words had been exchanged, the air cleared, and though there were no grand gestures or dramatic proclamations, there was a sense of peace settling between them. It was the kind of understanding that only grew stronger with time, a love that didn't need to be rushed or forced. It was simply real. Ethan looked at Clara, his heart full, the shadows of his past finally lifting. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with gratitude. "For listening. For understanding. I never thought I could feel like this again." Clara's smile was soft but full of warmth. "There's no need to thank me. You've already shown me who you are. That's enough." She leaned forward then, her lips meeting his in a kiss that was gentle and tender, like a promise. It wasn't a kiss born out of desperation or need. It was a kiss that reflected the quiet strength of their bond, the kind that grew over time. When they pulled away, Clara rested her forehead against his, her eyes searching his face as though reading every silent thought. "I'm here," she said simply, and that was all that needed to be said. Meanwhile, across town, Lena sat in the living room of the house she had built with Mark. She could hear him in the kitchen, humming softly as he prepared dinner. The comforting rhythm of their everyday life had become something she cherished more than anything. It had been a long day, and as she sank into the couch, Lena let herself relax. There was a weight that had lifted from her shoulders in recent days. She hadn't realized how much the tension with Ethan had lingered until now. And though it hadn't been easy, she was finally at peace with her decision. Mark walked in, setting a plate of food in front of her with a playful grin. "I made your favorite," he said, sitting beside her and nudging her gently. "I thought you could use a little comfort food tonight." Lena smiled, touched by the gesture. She took a bite, savoring the familiar flavors. The warmth between them was palpable, the years of partnership and shared memories woven into the fabric of their relationship. "Thank you," Lena said softly, her voice filled with affection. "You always know how to make me feel better." Mark's expression softened, and he leaned in, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It's the least I can do. You deserve the world, Lena. I know we've had our share of ups and downs, but I'm glad you're here. I'm glad we are here." Lena's heart swelled, and she placed her hand over his. The weight of her past now settled in the background, where it belonged. She had chosen loyalty. She had chosen Mark. And as she looked into his eyes, she realized that the love they shared was stronger than any challenge they had faced. In that moment, as she leaned in and kissed him, Lena knew that love wasn't always about perfect timing or finding the easiest path. It was about the commitment to walk it together, no matter how difficult the road. Mark kissed her back, and the world outside faded away, leaving only the warmth of their shared love. The night ended with both couples in their own quiet spaces, the weight of past struggles now replaced by the promise of new beginnings. For Ethan and Clara, their connection was new, a bond built on honesty and understanding. And for Lena and Mark, their love had endured, strengthened by the years they had spent together. In their hearts, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side. The future was uncertain, but in these moments, love was enough to keep them grounded, to keep them moving forward. Months had passed since that quiet evening in the cafe, where Ethan had finally laid his heart bare before Clara. Time had softened the edges of his past, and with each passing day, his life became a little more vibrant, a little more hopeful. Ethan and Clara had grown even closer. Their bond, built on trust and honesty, had flourished into something deep and unshakable. They spent their days sharing dreams, tackling challenges together, and supporting each other in ways neither had imagined possible. Ethan had come to realize that love was not about perfection, but about finding someone who truly saw you, flaws and all, and chose to stand by your side anyway. One evening, as they walked through a quiet park, Clara paused beside a blooming cherry blossom tree, the petals falling like soft rain around them. She turned to Ethan, her eyes sparkling in the fading light of the sunset. "You know," she said, her voice filled with warmth, "I'm really glad we gave this a chance. I know things weren't easy in the beginning." Ethan smiled, taking her hand in his, the gesture feeling as natural as breathing.
"Yeah.
But sometimes the best things come from the hardest roads. I'm glad we took that first step." Clara leaned in, kissing him gently on the lips, and when she pulled away, her eyes shone with affection. "I'm so happy we found each other, Ethan." Ethan's heart swelled as he gazed at her, feeling a sense of peace he had longed for. "Me too," he whispered, the weight of the past finally behind him, replaced with the promise of a future filled with love. Across town, in the house that had once held so many questions, Lena and Mark sat together on the porch, the cool evening breeze rustling the leaves of the trees that surrounded their home. Their life together had not been without its difficulties, but it had been built on a foundation of mutual respect, loyalty, and a deep, unwavering love. Mark leaned back in his chair, glancing at Lena with a smile. "You know, sometimes I still can't believe we're here. After everything." Lena laughed softly, the sound filled with affection. "I think about that too. But we made it, didn't we?" Mark's gaze softened, his hand resting on hers. "We did. And I wouldn't change a thing. You're everything I could have asked for, Lena. I'm just glad we're in this together." Lena looked at him, the love she felt for him reflected in her eyes. She had chosen this life, this love, and every day with Mark felt like a gift. They had weathered storms together, and now they stood on the other side, stronger than before. "I'm glad too," she said, her voice full of conviction. "We've built something good, Mark. Something that matters." Mark smiled and leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "And we'll keep building together." As they sat in silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of pink and gold, Lena felt the warmth of their love surrounding her. There would always be challenges, but she knew they could face anything as long as they had each other. Ethan and Clara's story, though still in its early stages, was one of new beginnings, of growth and healing. And Lena and Mark, despite the trials they had faced, had found a love that was steadfast and true. Both couples had endured, had grown, and had learned what it meant to love with all their hearts. And as the years passed, each day marked a new chapter in their lives, filled with the quiet moments of joy, the shared laughter, and the unspoken promises that only love could bring. For both Ethan and Clara and Lena and Mark, the future was no longer uncertain. It was theirs to shape together.